In this video, I want to go over just a few word problem notes and give you a few strategies on how you can approach word problems and solve them a little bit easier. Word problems are difficult. Usually they're the hardest things that students have to do in math, and so I want to give you a few options and ideas to think about while you're trying to solve them that will help you go over them correctly and figure out what math operations you need to use to solve them, and then write out an equation to solve them. So the first thing I want you to do is always try and figure out what math operation or operations, sometimes you need two or more different math operations, you need to use to solve the problem. Once you determine what math operation or operations you're going to use, then try and write out an equation with a variable that's like a letter like x or s or t, and then use that equation to solve the problem. So you're going to solve for that variable. Remember, variable again is like x, s, or t, usually some kind of letter. Let's go over a few different things that you can use then to try and determine what math operation you can use to solve a word problem. So when you're trying to determine what math operation or operations you're going to use to solve a word problem, there's a couple different things you can do. First, you can analyze the wording in the problem and look for key words that may tell you what operation you need to use. So those keywords often will give away the math operation, and we'll go over a few of those in just a minute. And second, I want you to look for totals and parts. Totals can also be termed a whole or all of something. When you're reading through the problem, you want to look and see if they give you the total or if they're asking for the total. So in other words, you want to find in the problem either they tell you what the total is or they're going to ask you to find that total. And the reason why that's important is that's going to help you reduce the number of math operations that you can choose from down to 2 operations. So you'll either reduce it down to subtraction or division or down to addition and multiplication. Let's look at some keywords for the 4 main different math operations now. If you see some of these words, there's a good chance that you're going to be performing these operations. Let's look at addition first. The first one is sum, spelled S-U-M, not S-O-M-E, and sum means the answer to an addition problem. Then you might literally see the word add. Obviously, if you see the word add, you're going to add. You might also see the word total, combine, put together, all together, in all, or you may be finding the perimeter. All of these words often mean you're going to add. Remember, when you're adding, what you're doing is you're combining, you're putting different things together. And that's really important to remember what addition is, because sometimes that will help you determine, if you see that the problem's asking to put things together, it'll help you determine to add. Let's look at subtraction now. If you see the word difference, that means it's the answer to a subtraction problem. So that's a dead giveaway that you're going to be subtracting. A lot of times what you're doing in subtraction is you're finding a gap. So it may say gap, or it may be talking about finding a gap. That is definitely subtraction. You also might be finding what's left over, or you might see the phrases how many more or how much more. Those are really, really common subtraction phrases. And then you also might see the phrase more than or the word fewer. All of those are a good indication that you're going to do subtraction. Now let's look at some keywords for multiplication and division. For multiplication, the word product means the answer to a multiplication problem. And you'll often see the word product in a problem, and you should think multiplication when you see that. You also might literally see the word times. That's a dead giveaway again that you're going to be multiplying. But you also might see the word total, area if you're solving an area problem, or in all. Factor is the numbers that multiply together to get your product, so you might see the word factor in there. You also might see the word multiple, and that again means multiplication. It's the root of multiplication. And then a lot of times the word of may mean multiplication. You do have to be careful with of, because sometimes it's just written normally in the English language of, and it doesn't mean multiplication. But sometimes if we see the word of after numbers, a lot of times that will mean it's multiplication. Now let's look at division. The word quotient means the answer to a division problem. It's kind of a tricky one to remember, but if you see the word quotient, it means they're giving you the answer or asking for the answer to a division problem. And like subtraction, you also might be finding a leftover or remainder. And especially what's key with division is you're finding equal parts or equal groups. So anytime it's asking for equal parts, equal groups, you're going to divide. Also, you might see something broken out evenly. That gets back to the same thing as equal parts or groups. So if something's being broken evenly, you're always dividing every single time. You might also see the word divide or divided in there, distribute, or the phrase cut up. All of those are going to be common division words or phrases. Now let's take a minute to look at totals and parts. I have over on the right hand side what I like to call the problem solving triangle. I've come to realize that most of the problems you're going to solve in elementary school can be solved using this problem solving triangle because it helps you determine what the totals and parts are, which in turn helps you determine which math operation you need to use to solve it. At the top of the triangle you'll see total, and that's really the key. When you're going through a problem, you can see if they give you the total or if they're asking for the total. If they give you a total and a part, you're going to be limited down to two different operations, subtraction or division. So if they give you a total and a part, you can subtract to find the other part, or you can divide to find the other part. Now if they don't give you the total, if they ask you to find the total, then they're going to be giving you different parts. You might have part 1, part 2, or you could have multiple parts like part 3, part 4, part 5, and so forth. But no matter how many parts you have, you're going to be limited down to two operations, addition or multiplication. And limiting your choices down to two will really help you be able to get the right answer. Now let's go over this a little bit more in specific. So as you read through the problem, always ask yourself this question: are they giving me the total or are they asking me to find the total? And that's very important because the answer to that will tell you whether you're going to subtract or divide or whether you're going to add or multiply. So if they give you the total in the problem, it means you're going to subtract or divide. So once you're there, now you have to determine, okay, am I going to subtract or divide? This is a question you can ask yourself to figure that out. Ask, am I breaking something into equal groups? If you are, then you're dividing, because that's what division is breaking something into equal groups. If you're not breaking something into equal groups, you can subtract. Now, what if they give you both parts and they're asking for the total? Well, in this case, if they're asking you to find the total, you can add or multiply. And remember what addition and multiplication is. This will help you determine which one to do. So you can ask yourself this question: can I add repeatedly the same number to find the answer? If the answer to that question is yes, then you're multiplying, because remember, multiplication is just repeatedly adding the same number over and over again. So if you're adding the same number, multiply. If you're adding different numbers, then go ahead and add. One more time, by looking at totals and parts, or looking for those totals and parts, will help you eliminate math operations and reduce it down, finally, hopefully, to one single operation you can use. And then from there, you can write an equation to solve it. I do want to give you a word on division because division can be so tricky. It's much trickier than any of the other math operations. So I want you to ask two big questions when you're dealing with division. First is to figure out if you're dividing. So the first question is, am I putting something into equal groups, or am I dividing something up equally? When you ask that question and the answer is yes, then you are using division. Now, once you know you're going to use division to solve the problem, you still need to write out a correct equation, which can be very difficult. And the reason why that is you always have to have the total come first in your equation. And so in order to get the total first in your equation, ask yourself this second question, which is, what am I dividing up? So as you read through the word problem, ask yourself, what am I dividing up? The answer to that question will tell you what the total is. And that's important because, again, when you're writing out the equation, the total always goes first in your equation. So I've written it down here. Remember that the equation has to be in the right order. So the total is going to come first. You're going to divide that by part 1, and that will give you part 2. Or the total divided by one of the parts will give you the other part. Let's look at two examples to give you an idea of how this works. So the first one says, 1/10 pound of cereal makes one serving. How many servings are in a 2-pound box? So the first question I asked you to say to yourself is, am I putting something into equal groups? And in this case you're taking a 2-pound box of cereal and you're breaking it down to even 1/10 pound servings. And so this has to be division. But the question still remains is, how are we going to write our equation out to make sure that the division is set up properly? Well, the question is what am I dividing up? Are you dividing up the 1/10 pound servings, or are you dividing up the 2-pound box? Well, as you think about that, hopefully you can tell that you would be dividing up the whole box, the whole 2-pound box, so that becomes your total. So that means that has to come first in my equation. So you can see here I've written 2 first, and then I'm going to divide that by my part, which is 1/10 serving. So 2 divided by 1/10 is the same thing as 2 times 10, which equals 20. In other words, there would be 20 servings of cereal in a 2-pound box. Let's look at our last example now. It says, Joe and 2 friends share 3/8 of a pizza. How much of the pizza does each person get? Well, again, I need to start by determining if this is division. So I'm going to ask myself, am I putting something into equal groups? Well, in this case I am. I'm cutting the pizza up equally. So as long as they're sharing equal pieces, we can use division to solve this. So the next question I need to ask is, what am I dividing up? Am I dividing Joe and his 2 friends up for the pizza to share? Or am I cutting up the pizza for Joe and his 2 friends to share? Well, hopefully you're able to realize that you're cutting the pizza up and not the people, because that would be a little disturbing if you decided you were going to cut people up. So we're going to use our pizza as our total. So we're going to take 3/8 of pizza, that becomes our total, that comes first in our equation, and I'm going to divide that by 3 people because Joe and his 2 friends added together equals 3. So my equation 3/8 divided by 3 turns into 3/8 times 1/3, which equals 1/8, or 1/8 of the pizza that each person gets. A few things that I want you to remember from this video, especially when you're trying to solve word problems, it becomes difficult. So please try and remember these 3 things. 1, you need to try and determine what math operation or operations to use to solve the problem. After you've done that, the second step is to write out an equation. And then finally, after you get your equation out, the third part is just to go ahead and solve that equation to find whatever your answer is. So when you're doing that, first look for keywords or key phrases that can help you determine what math operation you're going to use, and then also use your problem-solving triangle and think in terms of totals and parts. That will help you determine whether you're going to limit it down to subtraction and division or limit it down to addition and multiplication. Second, I want you to think about division especially. If you know you're doing division, there are 2 big questions. 1, am I breaking something into equal groups or equal parts? This will help you determine whether you're using division. And then the second one is really key, is what am I dividing up? Once you know what you're dividing up, that becomes your total in your equation. And you always write total divided by the part for your equation. And then finally, after you've done everything, always go back and think about your answer and ask yourself, does it make sense? Oftentimes, if you write out an equation incorrectly, you'll get an answer that doesn't make any sense at all. So go back and always think about your answer. Does it make sense? If it doesn't, then you need to start over, go back and try and see where you made an error and fix that error. Hopefully this short video will help you as you read through word problems to determine what math operations you use and how to write out equations using those math operations and solve them correctly.